Greetings, loyal subjects. In this episode of History with Henry, we talk about a young king called Alfred, the Great Heathen Army, and some burnt cakes. Burnt cakes? Is that right? I like cakes.
Henry!
Yes, Catherine dear?
Just get on with it!
Yes, Catherine dear. This is the story of how the Vikings devoured most of England, but how one man fought back, and how the Danelaw was created. In the year of our Lord 865, a great army from Denmark invaded the ancient Kingdom of East Anglia. Viking raids were nothing unusual in England. It had been over 100 years since that very first Viking raid up on Holy Island. Ever since then, all the people living along the coastline of England lived in fear of looking out to sea and seeing dragon boats appearing on the horizon. But this Viking invasion was something a little different. It was led by three Danish brothers, Halfdan, Ivar the Boneless, and the third brother, Ubba. They were the sons of the famous Viking warlord Ragnar. They brought their army to England not to raid and plunder. They wanted two things. Firstly, revenge for their father. When Ragnar invaded England, he was captured by the King of Northumbria and was put to death by being thrown into a pit of deadly snakes. And secondly, the Danes wanted to settle. England had green and fertile pastures that they just didn't have back in their homeland. Plus, England was very badly defended. They believed it would be easy to capture the land and build a new life here. The Great Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, written at that time, described this army as the Great Heathen Army. It probably actually consisted of less than 2,000 men. But back in that time, that was a significant number. The Great Heathen Army landed in the Kingdom of East Anglia, and the East Anglian king panicked. And he did what probably most wise leaders would have done. He paid the Danes off. He offered them gold and horses if they didn't go around killing everyone. Surprisingly, the brothers agreed to the king's plan. They actually spent the winter at peace in East Anglia. Then when spring came round, they headed north. They were going to get their vengeance for their father. The Northumbrians had no answer to the might of the Viking forces. The Northumbrian king was captured, and the brothers put him to death. He was flayed. Essentially, he was skinned alive as slowly as possible, so it extracted the most amount of pain before the poor victim died. Over the next few years, Anglo-Saxon kingdom after Anglo-Saxon kingdom fell to the power and might of the Great Heathen Army. Finally, just one kingdom remained. The rich and powerful kingdom of Wessex in the south. Wessex had a new, young and very inexperienced king on its throne. A man called Alfred. It wasn't long before the Danes' attention turned to Alfred and the great kingdom of Wessex. The Great Heathen Army spent the winter of the year 874 in the town of Repton, the ancient capital of Mercia, right in the very centre of England. By this time, only Halfdan remained in England. Ivar the Boneless was dead, probably killed in the battle that finally won Repton for the Vikings, and Ubba had returned home to Denmark. In the spring, Halfdan took half of the Viking forces and they went north and settled peacefully in Northumbria. The second half were now under the command of a young and ambitious Danish warlord, a man called Guthrum. They wanted Wessex. They wanted Alfred's kingdom. In the year 875, they took the town of Wareham. To be honest, Alfred was more interested in books, learning, and religion than going to war. He also suffered from intense stomach pains that often left him crippled and in bed for days. So, Alfred resorted to the tactics that many leaders had used against the Danes in the past. He paid them off. This type of payment was known as Dane Gelt. Essentially, you could translate it as Danish gold. The transaction was done, and the two sides exchanged some hostages for good measure, and Guthrum went on his way. But he didn't travel long before he thought, well, this is rather a good idea. This Alfred fellow is very keen at giving his gold away, so instead of leaving Wessex, Guthrum slaughtered his hostages and turned round and went and captured the town of Exeter. Once again, Alfred decided to pay them off with Dane Gelt, and this time Guthrum did actually leave Wessex, but he didn't forget about it. Guthrum had many spies in Alfred's court, and Guthrum spent the time studying his new young rival. And he was always shocked at how pious Alfred was and how he never missed church. The Danes, of course, were pagans and they worshipped many gods, unlike Alfred, who was a Christian. Guthrum believed this pious nature of Alfred's was a great weakness, and he vowed that he would exploit it to the maximum. At Christmas, in the year 878, Guthrum and his men struck. They attacked the royal stronghold of Chippenham. You see, they knew that many of the Anglo-Saxons would be drunk after celebrating the Christmas feast. And Alfred and the important leaders would all be in church. They knew exactly where to find him. It was a massacre. The attack was completely unexpected. The Anglo-Saxons just didn't have time to defend themselves. However, after the bodies were searched after the Viking victory, there was no sign of Alfred. Somehow, together with his family and a few loyal supporters, he'd managed to escape. He retreated to the safety of the Somerset marshes, where he could hide in complete safety. Legend has it that while in the marshes, a kindly peasant woman offered Alfred shelter. Having no idea who he was and what his real status in the world was, she told him to keep watch on the cakes that she was cooking in the fire. However, Alfred's mind was on other matters. He was worrying about Guthrum and how he was going to reclaim his kingdom. And of course, he let the cakes burn. When the peasant woman returned, she scolded and chastised Alfred, having no idea who he really was. Alfred and his small band of men managed to build a small fort in the marshes, and it was from here they organised the resistance against the Danish invaders. Slowly, news of Alfred's survival spread throughout all four corners of Wessex, and at Whitsuntide he told all of his loyal supporters, wherever they were in Wessex, to meet him at Egbert Stone. They came in their hundreds and they took the battle to the Danes. The Battle of Eddington was a brutal affair. Shield wall met shield wall, each pushing against each other. As they push, they would try and stab their opponents. War was a long and brutal affair. Finally, Alfred emerged victorious. Guthrum and his remaining men fled back to the safety of Chippenham. Alfred wasn't in the mood to allow this. He took his own forces to Chippenham and they took up siege positions outside the town. Alfred's aim was simple. He was going to starve the Danes out. And 2 weeks later, Guthrum decided he needed to sue for peace. This time, Alfred was not going to offer gold. He was in a superior position and he'd been stung twice before. Instead, he negotiated a deal that would ensure that the Vikings left Wessex for good. Guthrum had little choice but to agree, but then Alfred introduced one final clause. The Danes would only be allowed to leave if Guthrum was baptised into the Christian faith. With the lives of his men at risk, Guthrum had to agree. Alfred himself acted as godfather at Guthrum's baptism. The terms of Alfred's deal were very clear. It basically divided England into two and expanded Wessex to the south and then to the north, above the Thames and Watling Street. That would be Guthrum's kingdom. A kingdom that would become known as the Danelaw, the area of Danish control in England. And that's how England remained for many years. In the south, under the control of the Anglo-Saxons, and towards the north, in the control of the Danes. I hope you enjoyed this story in History with Henry. Join us soon for more great stories from history. And don't forget to subscribe.